Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast, and I'm back to the YouTube channel to Greece, as you may recognize the familiar background here. I'm going to be talking to you about Mars stationing direct. This is the chart for Greece. It's happening hours from now. And you'll see we have Mars stationing direct in 17 degrees of Cancer, and it is forming an exact trine to Mercury in 17 degrees of Pisces. And Mercury is also conjunct Saturn at 20 degrees of Pisces. So let's talk about some of the things that you may be noticing and feeling. For one, we just went through Mars retrograde in Cancer. It started in Leo, but it spent a good amount of time in Cancer, both before the retrograde and during it. And one of the themes was certainly excavating emotional content, whether we were doing that on purpose or whether it was just happening through life, getting triggered by circumstances, something that happens during Mars retrograde. I've noticed is that there is like a way that life has of confronting us with material, having a conflict come up in our lives that just gets us to feel certain things that we wouldn't feel otherwise. So there has been a theme around emotional courage or facing our emotions, feeling, and that being really activated and charged with Mars in Cancer. While it's stationing, trining Mercury and Saturn, I find that really interesting. I find it interesting in that when you put Mercury and Saturn together, there is a kind of editor consciousness, right? So it can relate to the part of our mind that is cautious or puts limits on things. It could be the part of our mind that's self-critical, right? That we critique or edit ourselves. And it can also be about mental boundaries. And the interesting thing about pain or feeling our feelings is that there is a way of that being efficient or that being relevant or necessary or part of a healing process. And there can also be, what happens when we're just on a roller coaster, when we go on the ride, we get lost, we get in the loop, or we entertain certain avenues of consciousness that could possibly have no limits. So I don't know about you, but if you know that experience of entertaining a type of thought, a train of thought, maybe a painful memory or some kind of unresolved inner conflict or grief process where that channel of sadness or grief or anger, resentment, whatever it is, might just last forever. That no matter how hard you try to figure it out, heal it, fix it, solve it, it just exists forever. And this can be really intense to realize because maybe there's a part of our mind that feels like, well, if I could just get to the bottom of it, or if I could just understand why, right? Or if I could just figure out how to heal myself totally. And so the mind is kind of running around trying to solve something that may just always hurt. The grief might always last. Some wounds that we encounter in this life never become not sore. So, enacting mental boundaries or having boundaries in our consciousness around pain points might be something that's coming up during the Mars station. Why is this? Is it's happening in water signs. Mars in Cancer has already been poking at tender spots, which has been maybe surgical and maybe magical or helpful in certain ways. Maybe we've grown a lot during this retrograde from that. Maybe it's still hurt or been really difficult. And there has been a time and place to have the emotional courage to face certain things. When I see this Mercury Saturn conjunction in Pisces, though, it just makes me think about having some level of limit or discipline on what would otherwise be boundaryless and infinite, right? Like if you think about like a well, like a deep well of any particular channel of consciousness that you could possibly explore. and how the illusion that you can make the channel go away or that you can heal something all the way galvanizes us to think about the same thing over and over again, to loop around it, to try to make it better, to try to heal it. And meanwhile, life, or our well being slips away inside of that. And so part of the mental boundary, it's not just about repressing something, it's not about stuffing something away or pretending it doesn't exist, but using the power of our focus, to think about what would serve life, what would create nourishment, Cancer, what would create magic, Pisces, what would love look like here? What can I do to cultivate more love in myself and in my life? How can I just go enjoy myself, right? And creating currents of resourcing energy and letting some threads relax. I think that will be maybe something that we're experiencing because otherwise, the Mercury in Pisces is a relatively boundaryless mind. It is conjunct Saturn, so there is something about limits that's coming up. And then again, Mars in Cancer is poking tender and sensitive spots. And so there is something coming up around like, okay, where is enough enough? Like whatever you unearthed during this retrograde, some of it has been productive to feel, and there's also limits to swirling around in our own personal grief channels. Something I wrote from my notes here is that, there has been a focus on facing our emotions or facing pain. And we can also acknowledge when this particular endeavor or direction of consciousness becomes debilitating or has too much of a tax, such as in the case of trying to understand like why questions around misfortune or suffering. And rather than finding answers, we're only going deeper into despair or victimization, reinforcing that, or an impossible sense of tragedy and grief. And that is a difficult thing, I think, to face, is that there are some, I'm thinking of Kara Cunningham on Instagram saying something, and I'm just quoting from memory of, life is either really silly or sad. So I would rather keep it silly, basically. I would rather be a miss than miserable. I wish I had the direct quote because that would be better. But basically, recognizing that sometimes perseverating or looping around or focusing on something tragic, where maybe we don't have the power to turn back time, we can't change the choices we made, we can't change certain things that are out of our power, and then continuing to, perseverate or loop around thinking about certain things creates despair. Right. And then from that despair, that energy, it doesn't make it easy to create the life that we actually want to. So I think really, and I'll just kind of leave it at this, there is a theme coming up around having discipline mentally around how we are focusing and directing our energy. Acknowledging, if you, I think that this experience maybe is stronger on psychedelics, for example, where, if you start to entertain a certain type of thought, or you're pulled into it because sometimes you don't have as much of a choice, there are certain corners of just like existential reality that are really, really dark and difficult. And you can also, through your will or through what you focus on, alchemize that energy or move into something more creative, right? So this is a tricky one because sometimes we get a sense of like we feel like we're doing something important, or we feel like we're doing the work, or we feel like we're facing our shadows. Like we get this sense of like, I'm doing the right thing by looking into the darkness and facing the shit that needs to be faced. And there is a time and place for that. Simply, though, I do think there is something about this transit that is saying, well, what are the lines and what are the boundaries? And is it serving you? Is it serving how you're showing up in life to perseverate and focus on things that create and amplify the pain body? The other way around, right? I've been talking a little bit about almost like this Mercury Saturn having mental limits, applying that to what Mars is doing. If we think about Mars in Cancer acting on the Mercury Saturn conjunction in Pisces, I want to offer another possible interpretation for what you might be feeling around this station. I'm going to pause here and actually just say to please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I forgot to say that at the beginning, but it really does help the channel grow and help me connect with people that might resonate with these messages. So Mars in Cancer acting on Mercury Saturn, I think, is interesting because the Mercury Saturn in Pisces could represent a part of ourselves that is having harsh thoughts in the realm of, say, like we're not really having grace or forgiveness, like something is existentially or spiritually wrong. Something went wrong, something is not okay, right? Like that's the interpretation. Because from, say, like a more idealized Pisces vision, there is a sense of meaning and order in life. Like we really trust God, we trust life. But Mercury, Saturn, and Pisces could be the type of thoughts that are coming up where we just can't reconcile like the meaning of something. Like there's kind of like a spiritual problem or a spiritual crisis, which, as I was pointing out earlier, can also be a source of endless pain, right? If you think about past painful memories or deep kinds of injustices or tragedies, for example, there's not really a satisfactory why. And that's really difficult for the mind to swallow. And then we just are straight into our feels, right? Like being with grief. And then also, again, deciding what are we going to invest energy into? What are the steps that we can take to create a better world for ourselves and for others? But back to this thread around Mercury, Saturn, and Pisces, and this sense of an existential problem. Something doesn't quite make sense spiritually. Mars in Cancer brings in a certain kind of heat that I think is really young. I think it can have a protest behavior to it of like, this is unfair. I hate this. I'm mad. I need to, write an angry letter or say something or push up against this problem. And in some cases, I think like the Mercury Saturn might already feel like acting out in an angry way is maybe not wise, right? Like there's a part of us that is already recognizing the futility, or maybe that the method of protest won't really work, or it's just kind of like, putting our fists up in the air, but it's not like really doing anything. And so that sense of internal repression around that kind of young or victimized feeling of anger. However, I think that there might be an unthawing process or something moving inside of that to really be in the acknowledgement of that energy that's coming through. Even though there might be a sense of restriction on how to act on it, a sense of wisdom to not act on it, there may be a process of acknowledging that anger or frustration that de-thaws a sense or starts to move forward the story of healing and forgiveness. Right? Like if you already feel that the protest behavior, the kind of resistance or victimization or youthful energy, that the immaturity, etc., that's showing up to the conflict, letting that at least have a voice in your own process can start to de-thaw and move forward the process of acknowledging the gravity of the situation, the pain point, and maybe generate some more matured ideas around it, such as, after the bargaining, after the protest behavior, a deeper acceptance settling in, maybe deeper spiritual insights around forgiveness, around the situation, whether for ourselves or for others. So, not necessarily the most lighthearted feeling of a transit, but I do think that there is a lot of wisdom inside of it potentially in recognizing the futility of staying stuck in certain mental and emotional loops, realizing that maybe the problem doesn't have to be solved or the problem is not possible to be solved, right? Like there is what's in our power and there's also what's beyond us. And then really reflecting on if I pull my life force energy back from futile protest behaviors, or, however I'm looping my energy, if I pull myself back from that, how do I want to be in reverence of this life force energy, right? Which is Mars, to serve and create the life that really matters. And this brings in the visionary side of Pisces, right? And it's also, Cancer is about nurturance. It's about understanding life, right? Like how to support the growth of life, how to nourish. And those small and tender acts, like switching toward nutrition and cultivation, which takes time, begins to grow experiences and circumstances that are far more enjoyable and nourishing to be inside of. And when we are so consumed inside of disempowering or debilitating pain or mental loops, it's really hard to have all of our energy in place to do something that's creating more love in our world, right? In our lives at a personal, local scale, or however that wants to ripple out in a bigger picture kind of way. This is my theory on the Mars station, is that we've gone through this whole emotional crucible and we're getting to a place of reflecting on when certain things do not need to be looped around or obsessed about, and when we can reclaim that vital energy and direct it in a more intentional, loving, constructive kind of way. And recognizing too that if that was easy to do, we would have already done it. One thing that can really help that process is if you're stuck in a loop that is an emotional addiction or something that's really disempowering, or you're really attached to an identity of being a victim, whatever the situation is where there's like a painful looping, to really consider what it is that you're getting out of it. And also if you are, if you pray, I think prayer is an amazing spiritual technology. I'm going to link actually in the notes. Let me just find this post because it really, really moved me. So I took pictures of it and I'll just quote him directly. So this is from David Guillaume. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He says, the process of forgiveness goes like this. 1, know that you cannot forgive on your own. Our souls are wired as such that we cannot use our ego to overcome our ego. We need the Creator's support. 2, you must want to let it go. Want it more than you want anything. Don't kind of want it. When you crave forgiveness the way you crave oxygen when drowning, you draw the Creator's support. What if I don't want it? How can I get there? Pray for it. The sages say to pray, to want it. 3, look at where the narrative of betrayal is part of your identity. Identify how it may bring you comfort and pleasure. Pray to release this limited and small desire. A powerful prayer. Creator, I want to fully forgive. I want to release all resentment. I want none of the pleasure that comes from feeling like a victim. Give me the power to let go. A mantra for you. With the Creator's unconditional love, I release all resentment. I open my heart to welcome love, peace, and a new destiny into my life. I think that was brilliant. It really touched me. And I think it's really relevant in that Cancer, when we're not able to process an emotion all the way through, resentment and bitterness is something that can come up in the archetype. And that Mercury Saturn is again this kind of existential problem, possibly. Something is wrong. I can't forgive it. I can't get over it. I'm stuck. I'm looping. And again, considering that there's an identity or maybe even a small cozy pleasure inside of that state of consciousness. Maybe we've gotten used to the room, the stuffy room, and what it takes to make the choice, the mental discipline to connect to something bigger, to have a bigger dream, and a bigger dream of how we want to direct our vital energy. So that's what I have for you. Please let me know how this resonated for you, what your thoughts are. Leave me a comment. I was just on a hike. And as soon as I got home, I was like really ready to make this video. I've been thinking about this transit all day. And I'm really, really just glad to be back on YouTube. I've been gone for a bit. So I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment and I'll see you again soon.